She had saved hundreds of lives in 12 years, but Sarah never thought her own life could be saved by a 16-year-old boy with a bullet wound. On an ordinary Tuesday night, everything changed when she made a choice that wasn't supposed to be hers to make. What started as a simple act of compassion became a dangerous game where nothing was as it seemed. In the next 30 minutes, Sarah would discover that the person she was trying to save might be the one who needed saving the most, and that sometimes helping someone means risking everything.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision as she adjusted the IV line on Mr. Patterson, a 68-year-old man with recurring chest pain. Her fingers worked automatically, muscle memory built from 12 years of night shifts at Mercy General Hospital's emergency room. She wasn't really thinking about what she was doing. She rarely was anymore. The ER hummed with its familiar midnight rhythm. The beep of monitors, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the distant sound of someone in pain echoing through the corridors. Sarah had learned to tune it all out, to move through the chaos like a ghost, present but disconnected. Patterson's EKG looked stable, she announced to Dr. Marcus Chen, who barely glanced up from his tablet. He simply nodded and moved to the next patient. This was their dance. They had been dancing it for 5 years. Sarah knew his patterns, he knew hers, and together they kept the machine running smoothly night after night. She checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until her official break. Sarah had already counted down the hours since she clocked in at 7 that evening. Another 12-hour shift. Another day of her life spent in this fluorescent-lit purgatory where time felt suspended between living and simply existing. The break room called to her. Cold coffee, harsh lighting, and the company of 2 other nurses who probably didn't want to talk anyway. Perfect. Sarah moved back to the nurse's station and began documenting Patterson's vitals on the computer. The screen glowed pale blue in the darkness of the late-night emergency room. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes and the kind of smile that didn't reach them anymore. When had that happened? When had she become someone who looked like that? "You okay?" Jennifer, another nurse, appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. She was younger, maybe late 20s, still holding on to some of the passion that came with being new to the job. "Yeah, fine," Sarah lied automatically. "Just tired." Jennifer nodded as if she understood, but she didn't. Nobody really did. How could she explain that tired wasn't just about the hours? That tired was something deeper, something that had settled into her bones like a chronic illness no blood test could diagnose. The truth was, Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had felt excited about anything. Her divorce was finalized 2 years ago. Her apartment was paid for but empty. She had friends, technically, though she rarely saw them, because what did she have to offer anymore? She was just Sarah the nurse, the woman who had somehow turned into exactly the kind of person she had always pitied, someone going through the motions. She took the coffee from Jennifer. "Thanks." "You should take that break," Jennifer said, glancing at the waiting room where at least 20 people sat with various injuries and illnesses. "We're not too slammed right now. Dr. Chen can handle things for a bit." Sarah nodded and stood, stretching her back. As she turned to head toward the break room, the doors of the ER burst open with sudden violence. An ambulance siren wailed in her ears before she even registered that paramedics were running through the doors pushing a gurney. She saw blood first, so much blood, and then the body beneath it. A boy, probably mid-teens. His shirt was soaked red, and one of the paramedics was applying pressure to his chest. 16-year-old male, gunshot wound to the left chest cavity approximately 20 minutes ago. Lost consciousness about 2 minutes before arrival. 2 units of O negative on board. Vitals are dropping. The switch flipped inside Sarah's head. The exhaustion, the emptiness, the weight of her meaningless existence, it all fell away. This was the part of her job she actually understood. The emergency, the crisis. When everything else was stripped away, this was what she could do. She moved toward the gurney instinctively. "Get him to Bay 3, I'll prep for trauma surgery." Dr. Chen was already there, assessment beginning before they even wheeled the boy into the bay. Sarah's hands were moving again, this time with actual purpose.
She cut away the boy's shirt, revealing pale skin and a chest cavity with a hole in it that shouldn't exist. She had seen wounds like this before, too many times, but never in someone this young. "What's his name?" Dr. Chen asked, working quickly. "No ID," one of the paramedics answered. "He was found in an alley 2 blocks from the narcotics district. Police are following up." Sarah's eyes landed on the boy's face for just a moment. His eyes were closed, his skin already showing the pallor of severe blood loss. His features were soft. He still had the face of a child underneath whatever hardness he had been forced to develop. He couldn't be much older than Jamie, Sarah's neighbor's son, the boy who mowed his lawn and asked her about life, the boy who wasn't shot in an alley. "Type in cross," Dr. Chen ordered. "Get me a type A. Sarah, I need a second IV in the right arm, and we need to move him up to surgery now." The next 30 minutes were a controlled chaos. Sarah performed her role flawlessly, her hands steady, her mind focused. 2 more IVs, medication administered, blood work processed. The boy remained unconscious through all of it, his body slack and fragile-looking under the harsh fluorescent lights. They loaded him onto a surgical gurney and wheeled him toward the elevator that led to the operating room on the 3rd floor. Dr. Chen went with him, but Sarah stayed behind. Her role in this particular drama had ended. Now it was up to the surgeons. She stood in Bay 3, looking at the blood on the floor, on the walls, on her gloves. The reality of what had just happened began to settle over her. Someone, possibly a mother, possibly someone who loved this boy, was about to get a phone call tonight. Their world was about to be split into before and after, the same way Sarah's had been split when her husband told her he didn't love her anymore, when she had realized her marriage had been dying for years and she had been too busy working to notice. Jennifer appeared in the bay doorway. "You did good work in there." Sarah nodded absently, already pulling off her bloody gloves. She wanted to say something that sounded wise or experienced, but all she could think was that she had just been in the exact same ER bay drawing blood from a man with chest pain, thinking about her coffee break. And then in the span of 10 seconds, everything had shifted. The boy was going to live or die based on the skills of surgeons she didn't know, the random luck of where the bullet had entered his body, and 1,000 other factors completely outside of her control. Sarah would probably never know which way it went. She cleaned her hands in the sink, watching the pink-tinged water spiral down the drain. This was her life. This was what she did. She participated in these moments of crisis and trauma, and then she moved on to the next patient, the next shift, until she retired and died, and someone else put her in the ground. She had helped save hundreds of lives, but she had never actually saved anyone's life. Because saving someone meant doing something more than just your job. It meant caring what happened next. It meant staying invested in the outcome. It meant being willing to risk something. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. The same tired woman stared back at her, but for just a moment something flickered behind her eyes. Something that felt almost like recognition. She didn't know it yet, but in the next 2 hours her ordinary Tuesday night was going to become the most important night of her life. The boy that she had just helped prepare for surgery would survive. And when he did, when he woke up in post-op recovery with tubes coming out of his body and a detective asking him questions, Sarah would make a choice that would have consequences she couldn't possibly imagine. A choice that would set in motion a series of events that would either save her life or destroy it, and she wouldn't know which one until it was far too late to go back.
The boy's name was James Mitchell. Sarah learned this the next morning when she arrived for her shift and spotted Detective David Rivera sitting in the ER waiting area with a coffee and a worn notebook. He was a regular, had been coming to Mercy General for about 5 years, investigating everything from overdoses to gang violence. He was mid-40s, tired in a different way than Sarah was tired, the kind of tired that came from seeing the worst of human nature every single day. She was getting report from the night nurse when Jennifer pointed toward the waiting area. "Detective Rivera's been here since about 6 a.m., asking about the gunshot wound from last night. The kid made it through surgery. He's stable up in post-op. Still sedated, but the surgeons say he's going to be okay." Relief washed through Sarah, which surprised her. She had told herself she didn't care about the specific outcome, that she was just doing her job, but apparently she had been lying to herself. "The kid's name is James Mitchell. 16 years old, lives in the West Side, in a group home. He's got a record, nothing serious, mostly gang-related stuff, but apparently he's been running with the East Side crew for about a year. Sarah listened as Jennifer rattled off the details she had gathered from the night staff. James Mitchell. The name humanized him in a way his unconscious face hadn't quite managed to do. He wasn't just an anonymous gunshot wound anymore. He was James. He was 16. He was someone. The detective's been trying to figure out what happened, Jennifer said. The cops found James in an alley with a bullet in his chest and no witnesses willing to talk. There's some gang territory stuff going on in the neighborhood. They think he might have been caught in a crossfire. Sarah nodded slowly. This was the story she'd heard 100 times before. Kids in neighborhoods where violence was as common as rain, getting caught in the crossfire of other people's turf wars. Some of them survived, some of them didn't. The ones who did usually ended up right back in the same situation that had almost killed them. She found herself walking toward the waiting area where Detective Rivera sat, even though she hadn't consciously decided to do so. "Morning, Sarah," Rivera said, looking up from his notebook. He had kind eyes, the kind that probably had seen too much, but hadn't yet given up on trying to fix things. "We got him stable," Sarah said. She wasn't sure why she had approached him, or what she was going to say. "The kid, James, he gonna be okay?" "Looks like it," Rivera confirmed. "Bullet missed his heart by about 3 inches. Lucky kid in a way. Another inch and we'd be having a very different conversation." He took a sip of his coffee, which looked like it had gone cold hours ago. "I'm trying to get information about what happened, but James isn't talking. I was hoping to get more details from the paramedics or ER staff about his condition when he arrived." Sarah found herself sitting down in the chair across from him. This was unusual. She didn't typically socialize with detectives or involve herself in the investigative process. She did her job, documented her observations in the chart, and moved on. "He came in unconscious," Sarah said. "We didn't get any verbal information from him. The paramedics said he was found in an alley, but that's all I heard." Rivera nodded, making notes. "That's what I figured. This job's like pulling teeth sometimes. Nobody wants to talk to cops, even if they're the one who got hurt." He paused, studying her. "You've been working here a long time, right? Seen a lot of situations like this?" 12 years. And yes, more than I like. It's hard, seeing these kids get caught up in something that's not really their fault. Well, some of it is their fault. They make choices, but the choices they're given to make are pretty limited when you grow up in certain neighborhoods." He shook his head. "I've got a kid of my own. My son just turned 15. I look at boys like James and I think, that could be him. That could be him if things had gone different, if we'd lived somewhere else, if he'd made one different choice." Sarah had never heard Rivera talk like this before. Usually, he came in, did his investigation, asked his questions, and left. But something in his voice suggested he was having a moment of something. Doubt, maybe, or just the regular way to the job pressing down on him. "What happens to him after he recovers?" "Well, that depends. If he makes a statement against whoever shot him, we might be able to get some charges filed. If he doesn't, if he claims he doesn't know who did it or what happened, then likely nothing. He'll get released, probably go back to the group home, and go right back to the same life that got him shot in the first place." The words hung in the air between them. The same life that got him shot in the first place. Sarah found herself thinking about the concept of destiny versus choice, about whether James Mitchell had any real agency in what happened to him, or if he was simply caught in the machinery of a system that had been designed centuries ago by people who didn't care about a kid like him. "I should get back to work," Sarah said, standing up. But she didn't feel ready to leave. Something was pulling at her, some sense that this moment mattered in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "Thanks for the information," Rivera said. Then, as an afterthought, "You care about these kids, I can tell. It's rare in people who've been doing this job as long as you have." Sarah wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that she didn't care, that she was just doing her job and had stopped believing in happy endings years ago. But something in his observation stopped her. Maybe he was right. Maybe, somewhere underneath all the exhaustion and cynicism, she did still care. Maybe that's what made her so tired, not the physical labor, but the constant disappointment of caring for people whose lives she couldn't save.
James Mitchell opened his eyes for the first time post-surgery around 3 p.m. that afternoon.
Sarah wasn't supposed to be monitoring his post-op recovery. That wasn't her job. But she found herself checking the post-op recovery board and noting that James was in Recovery Bay 4. And when her break came around at 2:45, she took a walk that happened to pass right by his recovery area. He was pale, smaller somehow now that his trauma had time to settle into his body. The machines around him beeped and hissed with their mechanical rhythm. His eyes fluttered open and then closed again, the signs of consciousness beginning to return to his body. Sarah told herself she was just checking on his vitals for professional curiosity, but that was a lie. She was there because something inside her had shifted, some realization that this boy represented something more than just a patient. When his eyes opened again and focused for a moment on her face, she saw the fear in them. The panic of waking up in a hospital, tubes in your body, not knowing where you were or what had happened. "You're okay," Sarah said, speaking in the calm, measured tone she had perfected over 12 years. "You're in the hospital. You had surgery, but the surgery went well. You're going to be fine." James's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat was dry from the anesthesia, his body weak from the trauma and blood loss. "Don't try to talk," Sarah continued, adjusting his pillow slightly. "Just rest. The doctors will be around soon to check on you. You're safe here." Safe here. The words felt like a promise she had no business making, but she made it anyway. Over the next 4 days, Sarah made a point of seeing James whenever she worked. She told herself it was professional interest, but she knew it was becoming something else. She listened while he slowly regained consciousness and strength. She brought him extra blankets when he was cold. She sat with him during the difficult moments when the reality of what had happened began to sink in. On the 4th day, James was well enough to talk. His voice was hoarse, but words came. "Thank you," he said, "for being nice when I woke up." Sarah was checking his bandages, her hands gentle and practiced. "That's my job. I'm a nurse." No, James said, and there was something in his voice that caught her attention. You treated me like I was a person, not like I was trash or a gang member or whatever people think I am." Sarah looked at his face then, really looked at it. Underneath the bandages and the hospital setting, she could see a boy who was terrified and alone. She could see someone who had been failed by every system designed to protect him. You are a person. You're not defined by other people's assumptions. It was a simple statement, but the moment she said it, she knew she was crossing a line. She was no longer just his nurse. She was becoming his advocate, his ally, someone who had made a choice to see him as something more than his circumstances. This is when she should have stepped back. This was when a wise person, a person with healthy boundaries, would have said that she had done her job and now needed to professionally distance herself. Instead, Sarah made the choice that would change everything. On the 5th day, when the doctors cleared James to be discharged, Sarah asked to speak to Detective Rivera privately. "What do you point to happen to him?" she asked. Rivera looked uncomfortable. "He'll likely go back to the group home. Unless he wants to cooperate with our investigation, there's not much I can do for him." "What if he wants out? What if he wants a different life?" Rivera raised his eyebrow. "Does he?" Sarah didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "Is there anyone working with the youth services organizations you trust? Anyone who actually tries to help kids like James?" The detective studied her for a long moment. "There's a place called Second Chance Rising. They do good work with at-risk youth. Why?" "I think that James might benefit from having someone interested in his welfare, someone outside the system." Rivera understood then what she was asking. what she was implying, and instead of discouraging her, he did something that would later seem like the most helpful or most damaging thing he could have done. He gave her the number for Second Chance Rising. Sarah called the organization that evening from her apartment, her heart pounding at her chest like she was doing something illegal. She made an appointment, took information, promised to provide the medical documentation they needed. She had just crossed from being a concerned professional into something altogether different, an advocate, a savior, or possibly, though she didn't know it yet, a target. Because what Sarah didn't understand was that there were people who had very specific interest in James Mitchell's survival, people for whom a 16-year-old boy trying to leave gang life was a problem that needed solving. And when those people found out that Sarah, an emergency room nurse, had become the catalyst for James' escape, they would see her as a problem, too. The choice Sarah had made in Recovery Bay 4, the choice to treat James as a person worthy of saving, would ripple outward in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. In the next 72 hours, her ordinary life would collide with a world of violence and loyalty codes she had no idea existed. And by then, it would be too late to take her choice back.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The three men who walked into the Mercy General ER at 11:30 p.m. on a Friday night looked like they had no business being there. Sarah noticed them immediately, not because she was particularly observant, but because they moved through the waiting area with a kind of predatory grace that didn't belong in a hospital. One was tall, maybe mid-20s, with tattoos crawling up his neck. The others flanked him, younger, their eyes constantly scanning the room like they were counting exits and evaluating threats. It took Sarah approximately 3 seconds to realize they were looking for James. James had been discharged 4 days ago, transferred directly to Second Chance Rising's residential facility across the city. Sarah had made sure everything was arranged, had personally walked him through the process, and had given her her cell phone number with explicit instructions to call if he needed anything. He had texted her that morning, "First day of classes here is tomorrow. Thanks for everything." Sarah's heart had swelled with something she hadn't felt in years, the genuine sense that she had made a difference. Now, standing at the nurse's station and watching 3 gang members scan the ER waiting room with focused intensity, she realized that making a difference and making a mistake might be the same thing. The tall one approached the nurse's station. Sarah made a point of turning to the computer, not looking at him, a technique she had perfected over 12 years of dealing with people she needed to avoid engaging with. "We're looking for someone," the man said. His voice was quiet, controlled, which made it somehow more threatening than if he had shouted. 16-year-old kid named James Mitchell. He came through here about a week ago, gunshot wound. Jennifer was standing next to her, her young face confused. Sarah subtly shook her head, a tiny movement, a clear signal, "Don't answer." "We don't have information about specific patients," Sarah said, using her professional voice, the one that was trained to be polite but firm. "You need to speak with the patient directly or have family authorization." He smiled, but it was the kind of a smile that contained no warmth. "Yeah, see, James is family, so where is he?" "I can't help you," Sarah said firmly, "but if you need medical assistance, I'd be happy to direct you to the right department." For a moment, she thought he might push back, might escalate the situation. But instead, he simply nodded to his companions, and they turned and walked back out of the ER as smoothly as they had entered. Sarah's hands were shaken. "What was that about?" Jennifer whispered. "Nothing," Sarah said, but she was already pulling her phone from her pocket. She texted James, "Are you safe? Some people came looking for you at the hospital tonight." The response came back within 30 seconds. "I'm fine. They found me. I knew they would." Sarah's stomach dropped. She called Second Chance Rising immediately and spoke with someone named Marcus, who confirmed that yes, some young men had come by the facility asking about James. He's secure, Marcus assured her, but you should know that when a kid wants to leave gang life, there are consequences. James knew that, but it looks like someone took it seriously enough to hunt him down. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the break room trying to process what had just happened. She had opened a door that led somewhere dangerous. She had extended her compassion to a boy caught in a situation, and in doing so, she had made herself known to people who didn't appreciate compassion. The shift stretched long into the night. Sarah worked mechanically, her mind fractured between her present duties and the implications of what had transpired. Around 2 a.m., Detective Rivera came in. He found her at the nurse's station and asked to speak with her privately. They moved to an empty bay. "I heard about the visitors tonight," he said without preamble. "How did you—" "I've got contacts," Rivera said. "Hospital security reported a suspicious incident. I put the dots together." He sighed heavily. "Sarah, I want you to thank you for helping James. I really do. But I need you to understand what you've waded into. The East Side crew doesn't take kindly to members trying to leave. James was someone they considered an investment. They groomed him, taught him how to move in their world. Losing him is bad for them. And the fact that it was easy for them to track him to the hospital means they're going to be tracking his connections too." The implication was clear. They would be tracking her. "What should I do?" Sarah asked. Her voice sounded very small. "For now, go about your life. But be aware. Don't change your patterns. That makes you look suspicious. Continue coming to work, but maybe start paying attention to whether you're being followed. And Sarah?" He waited until she met his eyes. "You might want to consider transferring to a different department or a different hospital. Make yourself less visible." Sarah nodded, but she knew she wouldn't transfer. Running from what she had started felt like betraying James somehow. Over the next week, Sarah tried to be aware of whether she was being followed. It was an impossible task, though. How did you distinguish between normal surveillance and paranoia in a city where thousands of cameras and hundreds of people were constantly moving through space? She saw men who could have been tracking her or could have just been existing in proximity to her. She heard sounds outside her apartment at night and wondered if someone was watching her or if it was just normal city noise. She started work at the hospital feeling like she was living in a spy thriller, except the sticks felt uncomfortably real. When strange men in the waiting room looked in her direction, she had a moment of panic. When someone seemed to be following her to her car, she called an Uber. The worst part was the uncertainty, not knowing if she was actually in danger or if she was creating danger through imagination. Then, exactly 10 days after the 3 men had shown up at the ER, someone broke into Sarah's apartment. They didn't steal anything. They didn't vandalize. They simply left a message, a photograph of Sarah, clearly taken over the past week, shopping at her regular grocery store, walking into the hospital, sitting in her car. On the back of the photograph, written in blue ink, was a single sentence: "Stop helping James or regret it." Sarah called Detective Rivera at 2 a.m., her voice barely holding together. She sat on her couch, surrounded by all the photographs, each one a violation of her sense of safety, each one proof that she had been watched, hunted, marked. "They're sending a message," Rivera said when he arrived at her apartment 30 minutes later. He had a forensics team with him, and they documented everything, though everyone in the room knew there wouldn't be any fingerprints. This was professional work. "What do I do?" Sarah asked. "You have a few choices," Rivera said. His detective voice was back, professional and calm. "You can go to the prosecutor's office and file a complaint. We can probably get a restraining order against anyone from the East Side crew, but that's public, and it might actually escalate things. Or what? Or you could distance yourself from James. Stop contact. Make it clear to whoever is doing this that you're no longer involved. Let them know that their message worked." Sarah looked at the photographs scattered across her coffee table. In one of them, she was smiling. She looked happy. She didn't remember feeling happy while that photograph was being taken. which meant that someone who was watching her had captured a moment she wasn't even conscious was happening. "If I back away now," Sarah said slowly, "what happens to James? James is at Second Chance Rising. He's actually pretty well protected there. They've got security, Marcus is ex-military, and the organization works with law enforcement. James chose his path. Your job now is to protect yourself." Sarah understood what Rivera was saying. The reasonable thing, the smart thing, the choice that made sense for a woman in her mid-30s who just wanted to go back to her ordinary life. She thought about James waking up in post-op, terrified and alone. She thought about the moment that she had decided that he was worth saving, that he deserved to have someone believe in him. "I'm not backing away," she said quietly. Rivera looked at her like she had just announced she was going to jump off the building. "Sarah, I'm not backing away," she repeated. "I'm not backing away. Whoever these people are, they're betting that I'll be scared into compliance. They're betting that the photographs will work, that the message will work. But the only way they actually get what they want is if I choose fear, and I'm choosing not to." "You're making a mistake," Rivera said flatly. "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but it would be a bigger mistake to abandon a kid who trusted me because people with violence want me to. That's how the whole system perpetuates. That's how kids like James end up thinking nobody cares, because when it gets hard, everyone backs away." I could see on Rivera's face that he understood her logic, even if he thought it was dangerous. After all, he had spent years in a job that had taught him the price of caring. "All right then," he said finally, "then we're going to have to be strategic about this."
Rivera arranged for Sarah to continue her job at the hospital under careful observation. He personally vetted the security, made sure there were plainclothes officers keeping watch during her shifts. It was strange and uncomfortable, like being constantly protected and constantly imprisoned at the same time. But something shifted in Sarah during this period. The fear she had felt didn't disappear entirely, but it transformed into something else. Resolve, maybe. Clarity. The understanding that there were forces in the world that preyed on compassion, and the only way to resist them was to hold on to your compassion even tighter. She maintained communication with James through careful, monitored channels. Rivera suggested they use coded language if they were going to stay in contact, but Sarah refused on principle. If she was going to do this, she wasn't going to hide it. Whoever was watching would know exactly what her choices were. 2 weeks after the break-in, Marcus from Second Chance Rising called her. "We've got a situation," he said. His voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath it. "James wants to meet you, in person. He says it's important." Sarah's heart started racing. "Where?" "The place you both know. The place where this started. Mercy General. It's public, there are security cameras, and James has something he needs to tell you face to face." Sarah knew what the place where this started meant. Recovery Bay 4. The place where she had first looked at James and seen a person instead of a statistic. Against Rivera's strong recommendations, she arranged the meeting for the following evening during her shift. James would be brought to the hospital by Marcus and 2 other staff members. They would meet in Recovery Bay 4, which would technically be closed, but would still be within the secured hospital environment. When James walked into the bay, Sarah barely recognized him at first. Not because of physical changes, he looked mostly the same. But something about his posture, his face, suggested that he had grown or evolved somehow since the 2 weeks since his discharge. "Hey," he said, and his smile was genuine. "I wanted to thank you in person, and I wanted to tell you something." Sarah glanced back toward the door where Marcus stood keeping watch. James seemed to understand her concern. "It's okay," James said. "I'm going to tell you what happened, why I got shot, why they've been looking for me, why they tried to intimidate you." Sarah sat down on the edge of the hospital bed, the same bed where she had sat while James was still unconscious, when this whole situation had felt like a medical matter instead of a gang matter. 3 months ago, I was working for the East Side crew. Nothing major, running packages, gathering information, that kind of thing. But about 6 weeks ago, I got promoted. I became close to the operation, And that's when I found out something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The East Side Crew isn't really just a gang. They run drugs, yeah, but they also traffic in information. They've got people on the police force, people in city government, people in different hospitals. They have a whole network of people feeding them data. Immigration information, medical records, financial data." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Detective Rivera is one of the people they compromised. About 4 years ago, someone in the crew had information that would have destroyed his family. They used it to flip him. He's been reporting on investigations, tipping off suspects, that kind of thing. He's not a fully committed member, but he does what they ask." The world tilted slightly. Rivera, the detective who had been so kind to her, who had protected her, who had warned her about the danger, he was compromised? "How do you know this?" "Because I was the one who had the information on him. They used me to keep him in line. I followed him, took photographs, gathered evidence. I was basically his blackmail handler, and I didn't even fully understand what I was doing until it was too late." Sarah thought back to every interaction she had had with Rivera. She tried to calculate what information he might have shared, what he might have reported to the people holding leverage over him. "That night I got shot, I made a decision. I decided I couldn't do this anymore. I decided I wanted to tell someone, to try to get out. But the minute I started making noise about it, they moved against me. One of my friends shot me. It was supposed to be a message, supposed to scare me into silence. But it didn't," Sarah said. "No," James confirmed. "It just convinced me that I had already lost my life if I went back. Might as well go all the way and actually save it." She processed this. "So the photographs, the break into my apartment, that wasn't just about me helping you escape. That was Rivera trying to intimidate me so I wouldn't dig deeper into what happened to you." "Exactly," James said. "Rivera was supposed to keep you away from me, keep you from getting involved. When you didn't back down, they escalated. But here's the thing. Rivera doesn't actually want to hurt you. He's trapped, just like I was trapped. He wants out too, but he doesn't know how." Sarah stood up and walked to the window of the bay, looking out at the hallway of the hospital. Everything looked normal. Nurses moving between patient rooms, doctors consulting charts, the machinery of healthcare humming along exactly as it always had. But now she knew that underneath it all, there were currents of corruption, compromises, people trapped in situations they never meant to be trapped in. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked, turning back to face him. "I'm going to make a formal statement. To a federal prosecutor, not to local police. Marcus helped me find someone we could trust. Someone from the FBI who's been investigating the East Side Crew's trafficking operation for 2 years. I'm going to tell them everything. About Rivera, about the crew's networks, all of it." "That's incredibly dangerous," Sarah said. "Yeah," James agreed. "But it's also the only way any of this ends. It's the only way Rivera gets to stop being their puppet. It's the only way the crew loses power. What about you?" "I'll be in protective custody for a while. Then probably witness protection if it comes to trial. I'll have to leave the city, probably leave the state, start over somewhere else." He paused. "But at least I'll be alive, and I'll actually be living, not just existing in someone else's system." Sarah recognized the echo of her own awakening in James's words. She had started this journey trying to save him, but somewhere along the way, he had become the one saving her. "Why tell me this?" Sarah asked. "Because you need to protect yourself. When I make my statement, everything is going to become very real very quickly. Rivera is going to know that I've turned. The crew is going to know. There are going to be investigations. You're going to be called as a witness probably, about my medical care, about the break-in, about your interactions with Rivera. And I need you to know what you're walking into so you can make the choice to walk into it consciously." Sarah nodded slowly. "I already made that choice when I decided not to back away from you." "I know," James said, "and I wanted to give you the option to change your mind. But I also wanted to thank you, not just for helping me, but for showing me what it looked like when someone chose to do the right thing, even when it was hard. The federal investigation that began 2 weeks later unfolded with the precision and weight of an avalanche. The FBI arrested 17 members of the East Side Crew, seized their operations, and dismantled the network of corruption they had built through the city. Rivera's involvement became public. He was arrested, charged with malfeasance and corruption. The narrative became national news for a brief, intense moment. Detective caught in gang corruption, young gang member turns informant. Sarah gave her statement to federal prosecutors exactly 14 days after her conversation with James in Recovery Bay. She testified about James's condition when he arrived, about the break into her apartment, about her decision to help him despite the threats. The prosecutor asked her why she had risked her safety for a kid she barely knew. Sarah had thought about the question extensively before she answered it. Because he was a person, she had said simply, and he deserved to have someone treat him like a person. The trial was scheduled to begin in 4 months. James would testify via video link from an undisclosed location. Sarah would be called to corroborate the timeline of events. The case against the East Side Crew would rest partially on their shoulders, but that was all still in the future. What mattered in this moment, the moment between Sarah's testimony and the world moving on to the next crisis, was the realization that had crystallized inside her, like a diamond pressed into being by pressure and time. She had spent 12 years believing her life didn't matter. She had spent 12 years going through the motions, believing that being a nurse was just a job, that compassion was just part of her job description. But the truth was more complex and more beautiful than that. Her life mattered because she had decided to make it matter. Not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through the simple choice to see a person in pain and decide that person was worth fighting for. Everything else had unfolded from that choice.
6 months later, Sarah returned to the emergency room at Mercy General Hospital for the first time since the federal investigation had concluded. The trial was over. James had testified. The East Side Crew had been convicted on trafficking and organized crime charges. Rivera had taken a plea deal, cooperating fully with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentencing. He would serve time, but not as much as he might have otherwise. His daughter had visited him in prison. His father had told the prosecutor. His daughter still believed he was a good person who had made terrible mistakes. Sarah believed that too, in a strange way that surprised her. The ER looked exactly the same as it always had. The beeping monitors, the fluorescent lights, the carefully choreographed chaos of emergency medical care. But as Sarah walked through the doors on her first shift back, she felt entirely different. Not because the hospital had changed, because she had changed. Jennifer ran to greet her, pulling her into an unexpected hug. "Welcome back! We've missed you." "It's good to be back," Sarah said, and she meant it. She had spent the past 6 months on administrative leave while the investigation concluded. She had used the time differently than she would have expected. She had taken a few actual vacations, she had reconnected with old friends, she had spent time thinking about what she wanted her life to look like. Most importantly, she had visited James once in a secure federal facility before his relocation into witness protection. "I'm going to start college," he had told her, his young face serious and hopeful in equal measure. "Out west, somewhere new. I'm going to study social work. I want to help kids like me, kids who think they don't have a choice." "You'll be good at that," Sarah had said. "I'll be good at it because of you," James had replied. "Because you taught me that people can choose to care even when caring is hard." Now back in the hospital, Sarah moved through her shift with a different energy than she had before. She wasn't the burnout nurse going through the motions anymore, but she also wasn't some kind of superhero or savior figure. She was just Sarah, someone who had learned that her compassion actually mattered, that her choices actually had weight, that being present for someone could change the trajectory of their entire existence. Around 10 p.m., during a lull in the ER traffic, Sarah found herself standing at the nurse's station looking out at the waiting room. There was a young man there, maybe 18, with a bandage wrapped around his arm. He looked nervous, the way young people looked when they were in a medical setting for the first time. His mother sat beside him holding his hand. Sarah watched them and felt a strange sense of déjà vu. This could be anyone. This could be James. This could be 1,000 other people caught in circumstances beyond their control, waiting for someone to remind them that they were worth something. She walked over to them and smiled, not her professional smile, but her actual smile. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm going to be part of your care today. I want you to know that whatever brought you here, you're in a safe place now. We're going to take good care of you." The young man relaxed visibly. His mother squeezed his hand. This was what it meant to be a nurse, Sarah realized. Not just the medical knowledge, not just the technical skills, but the simple, profound act of reminding people that they mattered, that they were seen, that their lives had value. It was toward the end of her shift, around 5 a.m., that her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from James, routed through a secure federal relay system. "I'm starting my first classes today. Made it through without falling asleep once. Thanks for everything. You saved my life in more ways than you know." Sarah read the message 3 times. She wanted to correct him. She wanted to say that he had saved his own life, that she had just been there to witness it. But she understood what he meant. Sometimes people needed someone to believe they were worth saving before they could believe it themselves. She typed back, "You're going to do great things. I know it." The response came back within seconds. "Because you taught me I could." Sarah pocketed her phone and walked back into the ER. There was a new patient coming in. "Motorcycle accident," the paramedics announced. "Young male, conscious but in pain." Sarah moved into position, her hands already preparing, her mind already shifting into the mode of emergency care. But something had shifted fundamentally in how she approached this moment. This wasn't just a patient. This was someone's son, someone's friend, someone's entire world compressed into a body in pain. This was an opportunity to remind another human being that they mattered. She started the IV, spoke in calm, measured tones, moved with the precision she had perfected over 12 years. But now there was intention behind every action. Now every movement was infused with the knowledge that compassion was not separate from good medicine, it was inseparable from it. Dr. Chen was there as he always was, brilliant and focused. He didn't comment on the subtle shift in Sarah's demeanor, but she caught him looking at her with something like recognition. Maybe he had always done this with his patients. Maybe Sarah had just been too burned out to notice. By the time the sun rose over the city, the motorcycle accident patient had been stabilized and sent to surgery. Another patient had come in with a heart attack and been successfully revived. A child with a minor head injury had been reassured and released. The machinery of emergency medicine had done its job. Sarah sat in the break room as her shift ended, drinking cold coffee and watching the morning light turn the sky pink and gold over the city. She thought about the 12 years before the night James Mitchell had been wheeled through the ER doors. All those years of going through the motions. All that time she had spent believing her life didn't matter. It was sad in a way. All that time lost to burnout and cynicism. But it was also strangely hopeful, because it meant that at any moment, anyone could make a different choice. At any moment, someone could decide that their work actually meant something. Someone could decide that their compassion was worth the risk. Sarah had spent 12 years being a good nurse, but it wasn't until she chose to be more than that, until she chose to see a person in pain and decide that person was worth fighting for, regardless of the consequences, that she finally became the person she had always wanted to be, the person who saved lives. Not just in the medical sense, but in the deeper sense. The sense of reminding someone they mattered. The sense of showing someone that the world contained people who cared about their survival, their growth, their possibility. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Rivera, released from prison on the condition of his cooperation. His message was brief and formal, as befitted their complicated relationship.
Got a job counseling former gang members who want to leave the life. First person starts tomorrow. Thought of James. Thought of you. Thank you for not giving up. On him or on any of us." Sarah read the message and felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about the cycle of it all, how compassion could create transformation, how transformation could inspire others to compassion, how the circle could continue spiraling outward, touching more and more lives. She thought about James, somewhere across the country, starting his college career, planning to work with at-risk youth. She thought about Rivera, given a second chance to do meaningful work. She thought about all the people who would be touched by what started on a Tuesday night when an ambulance came through the ER doors. And she thought about all the people in the waiting room right now, all over the country, sitting in emergency rooms and urgent cares and hospitals, waiting to hear that someone cared about their survival. Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave the hospital. She had 16 hours before her next shift started. She planned to sleep. She planned to go home to her apartment, which no longer felt quite so empty because now she knew it was a place she returned to after helping other people, after making a difference in the world. As she walked out into the early morning light, she made a silent promise to herself. She would never again believe that her life didn't matter. She would never again settle for simply existing. Every patient she saw from this point forward would be treated not just as a medical case, but as a person whose survival mattered. Because survival wasn't really what nursing was about. It was about reminding people that they had value, that they deserved compassion, that someone somewhere believed in their capacity to transcend their circumstances. Sarah walked through the hospital parking lot toward her car, feeling lighter than she had in years. The sun was fully up now, warming the concrete beneath her feet. In a few hours, the city would awake completely. Cars would fill the streets, people would return to their jobs, the world would continue on, indifferent and vast and full of suffering. But it would also be full of people who had the choice to care, to act, to transform their ordinary lives into extraordinary ones through simple acts of compassion. Sarah made that choice, and now, every day, she would wake up and make it again.
18 months later, Sarah received an invitation to a graduation ceremony. James had completed his first year of college and had been accepted into a prestigious university for his second year. The invitation included a simple note: "To the first person who ever made me believe I deserve to exist, come celebrate with me." Sarah sat in the audience of the graduation auditorium, watching a young man in a cap and gown walk across the stage. He wasn't just a gang member anymore. He wasn't just a trauma patient. He was a human being who had taken his second chance and transformed it into the beginning of a life that would help others. The cycle continued. And in the audience of the Mercy General Hospital, in emergency rooms and urgent cares across the country, there were other nurses and doctors and medical professionals who were beginning to understand something that Sarah had learned through one simple choice to care. Every person who walked through those doors mattered. Every person deserved to be treated like they had value. And sometimes the most important medicine you could provide was simply the reminder that someone believed they were worth saving. One choice at a time, one person at a time. One moment of compassion at a time. That was how the world changed. That was how you saved a life. That was how you saved yourself. As Sarah left the auditorium that evening, the golden light of sunset spilled through the wide glass doors, painting everything in a warm amber hue. She paused outside, breathing in the air, feeling the quiet hum of life around her, the laughter of students, the rustle of gowns, the sound of families embracing. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the familiar weight of exhaustion or the endless ache that came from seeing too much pain. She felt something else instead. Peace. Not the kind born from a life free of suffering, but the kind that comes from knowing your presence in the storm had mattered. She thought about the countless nights at the hospital when she doubted herself, The moments she wanted to quit, when the trauma bay felt more like a battlefield than a place of healing. She had seen lives end before they had truly begun, faces blur into statistics and hope lost in the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. But then there were moments, small, fleeting ones that changed everything. A patient who whispered thank you with trembling lips, a family who returned to say their child had recovered, or a young man who once came in bleeding and broken, now standing on a stage with a future in his hands. Sarah walked slowly to her car, the invitation still tucked in her hand. She traced her thumb over the inked words, that single line that had cut through every doubt she had ever carried. To the first person who ever made me believe I deserved to exist. Maybe that was what all of it came down to. Not the medications, not the protocols, not the endless shifts or perfect charts, but that simple, defiant act of believing in someone when the world had stopped believing in them. The next morning, Sarah returned to Mercy General. The hospital smelled the same: disinfectant and coffee, metal and hope. The night shift was wrapping up. The monitors were beeping softly, and a new rush of patients was already waiting in triage. It was a cycle that never ended. But now, when she tied her scrubs and stepped into the hallway, she didn't just see bodies on stretchers. She saw stories, unfinished ones, lives that could still be rewritten. A teenage girl trembling with anxiety, a man detoxing from years of addiction, a homeless woman clutching her chest, whispering that she had nowhere else to go. They were the same faces she had seen 1,000 times before, but this time she understood that change never arrived in grand gestures. It arrived in presence, in patience, in persistence, in choosing again and again to see the humanity in front of you. Weeks passed, and Sarah found herself mentoring a new nurse named Emily, fresh out of school, eager, trembling with both excitement and fear. She saw in her the same uncertainty she had once carried, the same question in her eyes: will I be enough? One night, after a particularly rough shift, Emily sat in the break room, silent tears streaking her cheeks. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "You won't always feel strong. You'll doubt yourself more than you ever thought possible. But the only thing that matters is that you keep showing up with kindness, with honesty, with heart. Because one day, someone will walk out of here alive because you did." It was a promise she had learned to believe in, the same promise that had saved her. Months turned into years. James sent postcards from different cities, volunteering at shelters, studying social work, helping kids who were just like he once was. Each message was simple but full of light, still trying to pay it forward. Sarah kept them in a small box on her desk, a quiet reminder of the power of one human moment. The world still broke her heart sometimes. There were still nights when she sat in her car after a shift, hands trembling, replaying the cries and the chaos. But she also learned that healing didn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it meant carrying the memories with gentleness, letting them remind you why you chose this path in the first place. Years later, when Sarah finally retired, her colleagues gathered for a farewell dinner. They spoke of her calm under pressure, her mentorship, her unwavering compassion. But what stayed with her most was when one of the younger doctors raised a glass and said, "You taught us that medicine isn't just about saving lives. It's about reminding people they're worth saving." Sarah smiled through her tears, realizing that maybe in the end, that was her legacy. On her last day, she walked through the hospital corridors one final time. The echoes of her footsteps blended with the hum of machines and distant voices. Every wall, every room held memories, the laughter, the grief, the humanity. She stopped by the trauma bay door, tracing her hand along its surface. The same door where James had once been wheeled in. The same door that had taught her the most profound lesson of her life. She whispered quietly to herself, "One person at a time." Then she stepped outside into the morning light. Somewhere the world kept turning. Sirens wailed in the distance, new nurses clocked in, patients arrived with fear in their eyes and hope in their hearts.
The cycle continued, not as repetition, but as renewal. Because every act of compassion sent a ripple forward. Sarah didn't need to see where they all led. It was enough to know that somewhere out there, someone was alive, someone was healing, someone was believing again, all because one person had once chosen to care. That was how the world changed. That was how you saved a life. That was how you saved yourself.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.